Welcome to Bizarre Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Bizarre Podcast. On today's episode I'm going to be talking about a haunted forest which is situated in Romania. Now this topic was actually suggested to me from a lovely lady named Syria who I believe lives in Romania as well. She is fascinated by the forest and she was wondering if I could cover it, and of course I was delighted. She also has some very nice things to say about the podcast, and I just want to say thank you very much, and it really is taken on board and I do appreciate it, I really do. So thank you very much, Syria. This episode's for you, the Hoia Baciu Forest. When I was a young boy, I used to love going to the park, like any kid does. And luckily for me, I had a slightly older sister who would always take me to the park. Now, the park where I lived was about 10 minutes away and it was a great park. It was fine. But if we were to journey an extra 20 minutes to half an hour maybe, we would get to the best park in town. But in order to reach this park, we would have to venture through the woods. I absolutely loved going through these woods. It was like a massive adventure to me. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves had just come out and I was fascinated with the woodland areas and imagining I was some kind of, I suppose, Robin Hood type figure, and I would imagine I was having fights in the woods and stuff like that. So it was a massive adventure for me to go through these woods to get to the park. So it was almost as enjoyable as it was to reach my destination. As we walked through these woods, my sister would often tell me ghost stories and tell me that these woods were haunted. I absolutely loved this. I was always fascinated with the supernatural, even as a child, and I wanted more stories and different stories every time we visited. Now one day we changed our journey ever so slightly and we went down a different path and we came across an old derelict building. Now this building, it was nothing fancy. It had two big pillars and then just beyond the pillars were the two big white front doors, and all the wood on the outside of the building, you could see where the paint had chipped away over the years and it was flaking away. All the windows were smashed. There was not one window that had a full pane of glass in it, but you could still see shards of glass clinging from the wooden frames. And my sister told me that this derelict building was haunted. She said if I was to go inside, I would stand in the middle of the room and I would hear children running around me in the darkness, giggling and laughing. I wouldn't see them, I would just hear them. And then all of a sudden I would hear a creak coming from above me. She said I would then feel an urge to look up, and when I did, I would see a dead nun hanging by a neck from the banister rail of the staircase. My sister then told me I wouldn't be able to move because I would be frozen in place. And then, as I stare at the nun's face, her eyes would snap wide open and she would scream. A terrible, terrible scream. And as I turned to run away, the doors would slam shut and I would be forever trapped inside with the nun and the children. Of course, it was all nonsense. She'd made it up, but as a kid, she absolutely terrified me. I think if my mother had known she was telling me these things, she would have gotten in a little bit of trouble. But as a kid, I loved these stories, and I think on some level I knew they were fake, but on another level, I totally believed her as well, and they terrified me. And you know, those weren't the only ghost stories she told me about these woods. She also told me that I was not to wander off, because if I was to get lost in the woods, I would definitely meet the ghost of the woodsman. Now apparently the ghost of the woodsman was supposed to look dead raggedy and unclean. He had a long brown coat, what was dirty and torn, and he had a big red bushy beard and two beady eyes that poked through his bushy eyebrows, and he had a big axe that rested heavily over his left shoulder. And if I was to meet the ghost of the woodsman whilst alone in the woods, it would chop me up into a million pieces and I would never be seen again. Now, as I'm telling you these stories, I'm come to realise that my sister probably wasn't very nice thinking back about it. But, you know, I loved the stories as a kid, and no harm done, I don't think. Now today, I'm going to tell you a story about a real haunted forest. Well, possibly a real haunted forest. I'll leave that up to you, as I always do. Now, this particular haunted forest that I'm going to tell you all about on today's episode is a home of ghosts, UFO sightings, and weird, strange time slips. This forest is called the Hoia Baciu Forest. The Hoia Baciu Forest lies in Romania, in the heart of Transylvania, home to the one and only Vlad the Impaler, or as you may know him simply as Count Dracula. Over the many years, the Hoia Baciu Forest has become famously known as the Bermuda Triangle of Romania. Now, apparently the Hoia Baciu Forest got its name after a shepherd. Now, this shepherd apparently went into the forest with 200 sheep that he was herding, but unfortunately the shepherd never emerged from the forest, and neither did his 200 sheep. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find any more information on the shepherd and his sheep. There just doesn't seem to be any other reference to him or his name anywhere. So if it's true, his identity has simply been lost to time or simply a nice urban legend. So like I said, the forest is known as the Bermuda Triangle, where things just simply disappear, as the shepherd did. He was never seen again, neither were his flock of sheep. That's the story. There are many, many more stories to come, but first of all, let me just tell you a little bit more about the forest, so you get a better understanding of what we're talking about here. Now, the Hoia Baciu Forest only covers an area of about 3 square kilometres, so it's not particularly a big forest, but that does not change the fact that it is often referred to as the world's most haunted forest, and a hotspot for UFO sightings. The trees all seem to grow in an unnatural manner, winding and bending, growing close to the floor before they go upright, and it's also said, for reasons unknown, the trees seem to grow in a clockwise direction. Now, if you want to see evidence of how these trees grow, it can be done so by a simple Google search. Just search the Hoia Baciu Forest. What I'll also include some images of this forest into the show notes, so be sure to check them out so you can have a look at what we're actually talking about. Now, from what I have seen on the internet, the forest is quite eerie, the way trees bend and twist. But I will also say this about the forest, and if any of you know the forest, or if you've looked at the images already, you might think I'm quite mad, but I think it actually looks quite serene and peaceful. I mean, maybe that's just me, because many people who visit the forest have reported feeling very uneasy and unnerved, and just feel very uncomfortable when they're amongst these trees. So, maybe it's just me. Now, if you make your way to the centre, you'll come across a big patch of earth, where it is said nothing will grow. It's a big circular patch, many say, is in the middle of the forest. Now, I don't think it actually is. I think it's more or less towards the edge of the forest. It's not actually slap bang in the middle. But I suppose when you're trying to tell a spooky story, I suppose saying that this patch of earth is in the middle of the forest does make it sound a little bit more spooky. But it's not. It's more or less towards the edge of the forest rather than the middle. Now, this big patch of land is locally known as a Poiana Rotunda. I think I've pronounced that right, Poiana Rotunda. This area is considered a dead zone, and often referred to as a devil's circle. Other stories claim that the dead circular area of land was created by a UFO landing there at some point in the past, and killing all vegetation forever. Even scientists have claimed it's a complete mystery as to why nothing will grow there. Nothing at all will grow in this particular area. Now, apparently when these scientists were doing the tests on the area, and this can be taken with a pinch of salt, apparently they found traces of radiation in the soil. Now, to many, this is proof that this was possibly a landing site for a UFO somewhere in the past, and this radiation has been left there and has contaminated the earth. It's also said that if you were to venture in the forest late at night, you may come across a group of people, or, for a better word, a cult, holding a seance in the middle of the dead zone, or, if you prefer, the Devil's Circle. In the Devil's Circle they would hold a seance and try and communicate with spirits or demons or devils of the forest. Now, I can't imagine why you would want to go into this forest at night time, but it is a very popular place for ghost hunters to go and visit, and I think it has featured on many ghost TV shows like Ghost Adventures. I think did an episode on the Hoia Baciu Forest at one point. I'm going to have to hunt that down and watch it, because we could all do with a laugh now and again. Don't get me wrong, I think Ghost Adventures is a great show. Before they actually do the investigation, I love the before bit, when they're telling you all the history of the place and they're telling you the ins and outs of the place. But when it gets up to the investigation, it can get a little bit silly at times. Anyway, we're going off track. I'm getting distracted. Let's get back to the Hoia Baciu Forest. Now, other people believe when these people are holding the seances, they're trying to open a portal to another world, as it is often believed that the forest is like a thin veil for here and someplace else. Other stories tell of strong red glowing lights that appear to people whilst walking through the forest, peering at them through a fog, mist-like substance. Now, just for a moment, let's put the ghosts to one side, and we're going to discuss the UFO sighting. We're going to discuss the most famous UFO sighting in the Hoia Baciu Forest. In 1968, a military technician named Emil Barnier was in the forest with his girlfriend and friends. Emil's girlfriend spotted a strange silver disc floating in the sky over the trees. She showed Emil, who saw it and managed to get a picture before it disappeared. Now, Emil, his girlfriend and his friends all saw the flying saucer, and they watched it for a little over 2 minutes before it shot off and disappeared. Now, if you want to see Emil's UFO photograph, you can actually see it with a simple Google search, but as before, I will add a picture into the show notes, well, a link where you can find the picture. Or alternatively, you can find us on Instagram and I'll have all the pictures up there as well for you to browse. Now, the picture was examined and viewed with a skeptical eye, but no evidence could be found of any tampering whatsoever. If you need any more convincing that Emil may have been telling the truth, well, what I can tell you about Emil is that he never ever once changed his story about what he saw. Even though after all these years he was constantly ridiculed, he was constantly told that he had mistaken the UFO for a weather balloon, and eventually it did apparently cost him his job. So for him to still claim that he saw what he saw, even after all this shaming and ridiculing and losing his job, I mean, that has got to give this story a little bit of credence, if you ask me. But you know what, we can't just take Emil's word for it. Now, as I said before, it is a UFO hotspot. Many people claim to have seen UFOs hovering over this forest. And ever since that initial sighting, there have been many, many more over the years. Visitors to the forest have also reported feeling very anxious and unnerved, and have an overwhelming urge to leave pretty much as soon as they arrive. People also report leaving with scratch marks, headaches, and strange rashes on their body. Also, some people have the distinct feeling that they have been followed by something that is clearly not visible to the human eye. Sometimes people report footsteps following them, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot behind them, and other times people hear horse hooves trotting through the mud. But people have also seen these so-called ghosts. It has been reported on many occasions that the forest can fill up with a deep mist-like fog, a thick fog, and inside the fog, deep red burning eyes can be seen peering at you as you walk through the forest. Now, it has also been reported that other apparitions of black shadowy figures have been seen in the forest, lurking behind trees or simply standing in plain sight, just staring at you. Also, there have been sightings of ancient soldiers from totally different timelines, all wearing different uniform or attire. And it has also been said that from time to time these apparitions of the soldiers can be seen engaging in combat, violent combat. Now, this reminds me of the story I told in my Haunted Pubs episode, where people would be asleep in the room, then all of a sudden they would see two men clad in armour having a sword fight right there at the bottom of the bed. Like some kind of, I don't know, like some kind of tape recording just playing over and over again, like the apparitions are possibly not aware of your existence. They're just caught in that moment in time. Maybe. And you know, whilst we're on the subject of time, it is also said that when you visit this forest, time can feel very disjointed, and a lot of people claim that time does not seem to run in the same way it would run outside of the forest. Many people claim that they had only been in the forest for, say, an hour, when in reality, when they left the forest, they found out that they'd actually been gone maybe 3 to 5 hours. So they'd lost quite a considerable amount of time, and they just could not explain why. Now, maybe they just got into the forest and lost track of time, and maybe they're having a good time, maybe. But to lose a few extra hours is quite a big thing, I would say, and something you would notice and be freaked out about if it happened to you. And that brings me to the next story, which is probably the most famous story involving the Hoia Baciu Forest, and probably the more well-known story, especially to the locals. And it involves the disappearance of a 5-year-old little girl. Now, it is believed that one day a family went for a walk in the forest. A little 5-year-old girl with a mother and a father. And at some point during the walk in the forest, the little girl must have wandered off from her parents. And she was simply lost. They could not find her anywhere. Her mother and father